Good morning. Welcome to Oak Creek Community Church. Both those of you who are here in person and those of you who are joining us on the live stream. It's good to be together. Happy Father's Day to all you dads out there. So I very innocently got kind of roasted by my little 4-year-old Gracie this week. Of all people, my sweet little Gracie, we were doing family devotions and we were going over Adam and Eve in the fall, and her eyes got really big, and she said, "Daddy, did this happen before you were born?" Thanks a lot, kid. Yeah, she got me. And then she made up for it. She said, "Dad, this is going to be the best Father's Day because we'll just snuggle." So I couldn't stay too mad at her. But all you dads, happy Father's Day is the joyful chaos that raising our kids is. And I always think too of my dad's advice. Some of the most pointed advice my dad ever gave me in college. I went to a Christian university, and everybody was pairing up. The saying was a ring by spring or your money back. And so Dad sat me down, and he had this. I thought it was going to be this really long relational talk, and he said, "Here's my advice to you, son. If you can live without her, do it." And then that was it. That advice got me through college. So as far as announcements go, he did tell me if I couldn't, then marry her, and so that's Sarah. That was that. For announcements, we have the showers for the McClellan girls. That is this Saturday, ladies, at 11 o'clock. And we have tentatively scheduled an all-church picnic July 19th. So keep that date open. For our opening this morning, I just wanted to take some time and bring us all up to speed on how this pandemic has been affecting our missionaries. And what is it like? There's obviously our world here has been thrown into chaos, but what has it been like for our missionaries? And we have connections with 5 missionary entities who have been serving overseas in various levels. Now, this will be kind of a lot of information. You're not going to remember all of this, but I encourage you, if you could just single out 1 or 2 aspects of what I am going to share over the next few minutes, I encourage you to do that, jot it down, and just pick 1 or 2 things to pray for. That I think would mean a lot to our missionaries. So we have Aaron and Mela Stocks who are serving in Alaska, and Alaska's economy to a large extent is based on tourism. And well, you can guess that is not happening this summer. So they are still trying to see the implications that will have. Aaron is doing a lot of flight instructing, but a lot of ministries that he would normally be involved in, which would be flying teams to remote villages for vacation Bible schools, a lot of that has been grounded. But he is still flying pastors. A lot of times these villages, of course, they have no pastor who lives there, so he is flying pastors to conduct Sunday services if the villages are okay with that. There are little things that showed up, like an intern showed up in Alaska right before this pandemic started, and then nobody really wanted to host him. So they hosted him and really made sure he was cared for 6 weeks. So there's just lots of little things on the mission field, little curveballs thrown at you, and that's what Aaron and Mela have been doing among keeping up with their troop. They are planning their first furlough this fall, so we look forward to seeing them. They'll come back to the lower 48 in September, and be praying for that also. This is a difficult time, as you can imagine. If you are living on support, this is a hard time to solidify and expand your support base. Aaron will need some additional flight training and certification, and they will also need a suburban and trailer or a used camper to do their traveling in. So those of you who have connections with that, keep your eyes and ears open. Slavik, our missionary in Ukraine, our team was going to minister with him this spring, and that didn't happen. But he spent this last week repairing a house in the village where our team has been to before, this little village, for a family with 7 children, so this family could get their kids back from the orphanage. The house was in very bad shape, so that his team is focusing on trying to reunite orphans with their families. And so they're going around to these villages where travel has been very restricted and seeing what repairs, what practical things need to be done. He also would appreciate prayer for finding volunteers for summer camps, because no foreigners are allowed to fly into Ukraine, and his summer camp ministry, that obviously is taking a massive hit. John and Kelly Musser and little baby Theo, I'm sure would appreciate your prayer as they transition to a new life and job in America and figure out what that looks like. Now, they've been back from Thailand for a couple of months, but oftentimes the period of life for a missionary that no one thinks about is when you come back. And there's a lot of reverse culture shock, because you can't get back to life as normal because you're changed. And obviously, the whole world is changing right now. And so I know they would appreciate prayer as they try to navigate what's next. What does God have for them in a job that would utilize both their unique skills and life experience. So please be praying for them. Alvin, our missionary in Honduras, he talked about in his latest update the tension that he is wrestling with, that I think is appropriate for all of us to wrestle with. What is the church's job, and what is the government's job? Our government is a lot more proactive than most governments. We have the financial means to do that, but in places like Honduras, they obviously don't. And there is still martial law, which greatly restricts the movement and options for people who are already living, well under the poverty line. And so there's no margin in nations like Ukraine, Honduras, East Africa. So he mentioned the story in his update, for those of you who get it, of Ruby, a 20-year-old mother of 2 little boys. They're aged 1 and 3. And the church delivered groceries to her last week, including 2 pounds of flour, but there were no diapers. And so Alvin, when he realized that, he said, "No, I'm sorry, for the mix-up, I'll take diapers to you." But she refused, because she had used the flour that she had from the previous delivery to make homemade donuts, and she was able to sell those on the street and get money for diapers from that. And she goes, "No, I want to take care of myself." So you get a sense just of the deep desire for people in these nations for dignity. And a huge portion of ministry for missionaries, how do we serve these people in a way that enhances and restores that dignity, instead of just makes them a charity project and robs from them in that sense. So I know he would greatly appreciate prayer for wisdom. How do you do that in the pandemic when the need is just overwhelming? And then Abdi and Laura Mahmoud, serving in East Africa. Abdi said that they're in a season kind of continual disruption, which on some level we can all relate with, but I'm pretty sure their disruption's on another level than ours. And one of the traits that I'm seeing with a lot of these countries who are trying to respond to the pandemic, these countries don't have the medical infrastructure that we do, so they are very panicked for what would happen if they get, thousands of citizens being sick. And so their approach is almost like attacking a wasp nest with a hammer. And they restrict movement. They don't allow, everyone's kind of under martial law. And so when you have people who are making such little amount of money, what do? They have no savings. They have to go out, every day basically to get their groceries. So there's no government checks. There's no food pantries. Homelessness is growing. Now, Abdi did mention an exciting new opportunity that he is getting is premarital counseling for unbelieving couples using biblical principles. So that is a neat opportunity he is experiencing right now. What a good time to establish a relationship with a couple. Laura has mentioned just little things that we wouldn't think about, but because the restaurants are closed, and I've heard this in numerous places, even New York City, rat infestations are getting a lot worse. So, like their home gets, some unwelcome visitors because all the restaurants are closed, the rats have nowhere to go. This is little things that you don't really think of, but that definitely raise your stress level as a missionary. So continue to pray for them. Pray for Abdi and Laura's steadfast vision as they navigate leading their church, their nonprofit meetings. Abdi, he is gifted in so many areas, but one of the drawbacks of that is he is just always stretched so thin. So pray for wisdom, how and where to prioritize his time. And always for favor with their community. They're surrounded by unbelievers who can be at times not very welcoming to Christianity. So always pray for favor for them in their community. So those are just some ways that we can be praying for our missionaries. And whenever we're in a crisis or a pandemic, it's easy for us to get tunnel vision. Our world collapses. And so this morning I just want us to expand it a little bit to see how God is working in all corners of the globe. That's a thought that always excites me. It encourages me. And as we head into our time of worship together, I just want to share a verse from Romans 8, which I think is appropriate for Father's Day. Romans 8, verses 14 through 17. For all who are being led by the Spirit of God, these are sons and daughters of God. For you have not received the spirit of slavery leading to fear again, but you have received the spirit of adoption as sons and daughters, by which we cry out, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, heirs also, heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, so we also may be glorified with him. That just always encourages me that no matter what type of father we each had, whether it's a great example or whether he was a terrible example, we have a Heavenly Father who is the perfect example. And we can call him Daddy. Don't take that for granted as we go into our time of worship this morning. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you that we can come to you and that through your Son, Jesus Christ, we have that acceptance, that affirmation, Lord. And I pray that you would help us sense that from you as we remind ourselves, gathering together, Lord, that the vision for life is bigger than each one of us. May the vision for our life, may it match yours. Expand it this morning. And I pray that you bless every aspect of our service and our time together. In your name, amen.
Well, he is in control, isn't he? He is so in control that he runs the universe and everything that he ever created. It's not just earth, but we are the most important thing to him this morning. His creation of the beautiful things that we see and the things that we hear as we listen to the birds and all of that is awesome, but we are the most dear thing to his heart, and he loves us. And we love him as we understand more and more what a deep love he has for us, what he did when he sent Jesus to the cross, and Jesus went so willingly for you and for me. Let's stand and praise our Heavenly Father.
Give me eyes to see more of who you are. May what I behold still my anxious heart. Take what I have known and break it all apart. For you, my God, are greater still, and no sky contains, no doubt restrains all you are, the great No doubt of this I am convinced, that you, my God, are greater still.
Father, we give you all the glory this morning as we sing these words, as we read into your word and talk about it and share. Bless our time by meeting us here with your Spirit. Thank you, God. Thank you, Jesus. We praise you in your holy name. Amen. Please be seated.
Good to see a few new faces. I don't mean new to Ora Creek, but new after kind of the shutting down of the church. We're slowly seeing folks return, and it's good to see 3 or 4 or 5 of you coming back today. Just so you kind of know, there's about approximately 48 adults who have not returned yet. Now after today, maybe it'll be 42 or so. So we have about 75 to 80 adults who have come back to one of the 2 Sundays we've had. So again, I don't say that to put pressure on anybody who's watching live streaming, but we'd love to have you come back, and it's good to see you all here this morning. Good to have my son and daughter-in-law with us this weekend, Kyle and Randy. They came to visit. Kelly and John and Theo left Thursday to go stay with his family for 3 or 4 weeks. And so they must have worked out a deal with Kyle and Randy to come up and visit, exchange. It's good having them on Father's Day weekend. We hung out at the pool all day, or a good bit yesterday, and then went kayaking. And Kathy and I took naps and watched them kayak. Because we're old, and that was fun to do that. And good to always have family here, and good to have you all here this morning, for sure. If you've been in the services these past 2 or 3, or even before we came back, I think we started online, right there, Gabe? Where's Gabe? We started Daniel, like, what was it, Sunday before we started back here? Maybe? 2 Sundays, yeah. So I'm not going to reintroduce the theme of Daniel and do too much review of it today, but I'll do a little bit of that. But as I was looking at my passage this morning that I want to share with you, and I'm going to do it a little bit different than I sometimes do. You've seen me do this before. It's going to be a little some discussion at the end instead of me just speaking the whole time. I was thinking about today we're going to focus in on 3 of the 4 teenagers who have been taken into exile by the Babylonians, or actually by God. God was the one that instigated the exile. And he stirred Nebuchadnezzar to come from the empire of Babylon and come and take the Jews into exile, take them back to their land. And the book of Daniel, especially in the first half, is focusing on 4 teenagers. It's kind of hard to remember that they were teenagers. You kind of forget that. It's hard for me to, I usually think of them as adults. But Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were probably teenagers, 15, 16 years old. Maybe as we get to chapter 3 of Daniel, they may be in their early 20s at this point. There's some years that have passed from chapter 2, possibly. We're not really sure. But don't forget, these are teenagers, and these are teenagers who are being disrupted way beyond what we've experienced with the pandemic. I've been whining a good bit about the pandemic. The first half, as I told you before, I handled the pandemic really well, because John and Kelly and Theo came into our home, and so that diverted my attention. And I had a blast for a month or 2 getting to know my grandson and having my daughter back in the house and all, and John. And that helped the first month or 2, but that wore off quick, because I'm an extrovert, and they aren't enough for me. I need all of you, and I missed all of you, and hanging out with you. And so the second half of the pandemic, I call it half before we came back to church, was harder for me. I got more depressed, I got more angry, as I've shared with you a few Sundays ago. I shared about that, and kind of just didn't like the disruption, the disorientation. For me, now some of you can't relate to this because you haven't been disoriented by the pandemic. Your jobs maybe kept them, and you worked at home already, so it wasn't that disruptive. For me, it was in a significant way. And I didn't like how I responded to it, and it just was troubling. But then I'm humbled when I read chapter 3 of Daniel and realize these 3 teenagers, we're not going to be looking at Daniel today when we look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are disrupted way beyond anything we're experiencing. I mean, just off the charts. Can you imagine? their parents were probably killed, likely. And these teenagers were ripped out of Israel and taken off to Babylon and brainwashed or retrained in order to help Nebuchadnezzar run the country. It's kind of an odd thing they did back then, 2,600 years ago. They would often take the children of the elite or children of royalty, kill their parents, and take the children with them, and they would retrain them, re-brainwash them, and they would use those children to help run their own country and whatever people they took from the country to bring to exile. They help run it. And you don't have to train the children as much because they've already been educated in elite education since they're children of royalty or children of rich people. And so that's likely what has gone on with Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Their parents were probably royalty or some form of very wealthy elite people. And it had already been trained, and so Nebuchadnezzar didn't have to train as much as we saw in chapter 1, where they trained him in everything about Babylon and their gods and so forth. So, but wow, figure being a 17-year-old, 18-year-old boy and the disruption you're experiencing off the chart. So keep that in mind. I remember some studies too, I talked about 4 unique aspects of the ancient world. And one of those aspects among 4 that I shared with you is it's a very raw, barbaric, brutal time. Way more than what we experience in our modern, postmodern era. Off the charts of brutality and of rawness of society and culture. And so Nebuchadnezzar is the world's known leader, and he is barbaric, he's brutal, he's arrogant, he's mean. He doesn't care. Anything he says will happen. If he says chop that guy's head off, that guy's head's chopped off like that. No questioning, no courts, no Supreme Court, nothing to keep him in check, like in our system in America. And so that's always helpful to keep that in your mind as we read this. So grab your Bibles and turn to Daniel chapter 3, as we will be looking at these 3 teenagers today, and how they're handling the pressures of being in exile. And the book of Daniel is being written to those who are in exile to encourage them that even though, now listen closely, even though circumstances seem otherwise, God is still working out his plan. He's still in control. Now, that brings up problems for God's character. You can almost wish he wasn't in control, and you could blame him for bad things that happen. But he's still in control, and he's allowing very brutal, bad things to happen to the nation of Israel to humble them, hopefully to bring them back in repentance to him. Because pretty much the whole country has rebelled against God, and for a long time, he's been warning them that this is going to happen. So here I just did what I said I wasn't going to do. I gave a review of the book of Daniel. Don't believe anything I said. What I want you to think about, though, as I read this chapter, it's going to be a chapter you maybe know well, especially if you've grown up in the church as a child. It's one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. In fact, I was going to bring the book. I forgot, Kath. IC4. It's one of my favorite childhood books, IC4, that I have. And I can picture every picture in the book as I go through this chapter. But what is going to happen, I'm going to kind of give you a quick synopsis before I read it and work my way through it. Nebuchadnezzar, for whatever reason, creates a statue, a massive statue, a 90-foot statue of either himself or one of his gods. We're not going to know those for sure. And he's demanding that the whole empire, which is pretty much the whole known world, is to worship this statue. My guess it is him. It's a statue of him, a 90-foot statue of him. And he wants the whole world to bow down and worship it at particular times. He's trying to flush out those who are in rebellion. He's trying to get the whole world to full allegiance to him and his arrogance. And so he creates a statue that's commanding everybody to bow down whenever music is played. And these 3 teenagers are having to be faced with this challenge. We don't know where Daniel is at this point. My guess is Daniel was such a high ruler that he was one of the few that wasn't required to bow down to the statue. That's why we never see him mentioned here. It's possible he was on a trek too, but I think more likely he's one of the very few, probably a handful, who didn't have to bow down to the statue. But the other 3 who came with Daniel are forced to bow down. and it's going to be interesting to see how they respond. But what I want you to be thinking as we read, and at the end I'm going to ask you, okay, none of us so far are being asked to bow down to any statue in the world, of any leader. We're not being asked to do that. Some countries have been asked to do that. We're not. So on some level, this chapter doesn't directly apply to us. We're not going to have the same dynamic where we're going to be forced to bow down to a statue. So my question is, what is God saying to us in our context? What are we being pressured or assumed to bow down symbolically in our lives? Does that make sense? It's kind of a very hard question. Yeah, we don't bow down to a specific statue, but what do we feel pressure from our culture to bow down to symbolically or in attitude or in some more subtle way than a physical statue? Okay, it's a pretty simple question. So at the end, I'm going to ask you after we read through this chapter. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read about 7 sections. Each section, I'll make a few comments, and then we'll talk about the question at the end. All right? So chapter 3 of Daniel, we start out with verse 1. I'm going to read the first 7 verses, and this is where Nebuchadnezzar talks about the statue and commands everybody to give allegiance to his statue. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue, 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. The guy's pretty skinny. And set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then he sent messages to the high officers. So these are his officers, but officers of the world. Officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officials to come to the dedication of the statue he had set up. So all these officials, verse 3, came and stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald shouted out. Now, how he did this with tens of millions of people, who knows, thousands of people, who knows. There's a shouted out, probably had heralds throughout the empire. People of all races and nations and languages, listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, whatever a zither is, lyre, harp, what's a zither, Alan and Cheryl? Harp, pipes, and other, don't answer that, and other musical instruments, bow down to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Verse 6. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. By the way, archaeologists have discovered furnaces from this area. So we know there really existed. Verse 7. So at the sound of the musical instruments, all the people, whatever their race or nation or language, so the whole known world, bowed to the ground and worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Wow. So this is where he is determined to expose those who are not committed to him and get everybody in agreement that he is the ultimate and they all have to bow down. Pretty simple what he's doing. It's not very complicated. But it's pretty bold and pretty rash and pretty strong act that he's doing. But it fits at that time. It's very common to have dictators do this kind of thing. But it does remind me, some of you, maybe your minds go to the book of Revelation. You don't need to turn there, but let me read to you the book of Revelation, chapter 13. It's a well-known passage. Happens during the tribulation. Sounds very similar to what Nebuchadnezzar is doing. Listen to it. I'm not going to give much explanation. I'm just going to read verses 11 through 18. Listen to it. This is the Apostle John describing a vision of a future allegiance to the Antichrist and the beast and so forth and so on. Then I saw another beast come up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like those of a lamb, but he spoke with the voice of a dragon. He exercised all the authority of the first beast and required all the earth and its people to worship the first beast whose fatal wound had been healed. So apparently a resurrection of some form of the beast that Satan did. He did astounding miracles, even making fire flash down to the earth from the sky while everyone was watching. And with all the miracles he was allowed to perform on behalf of the first beast, these are humans, by the way, called beasts, he deceived all the people who belonged to this world. He ordered the people to make a great statue, where have we heard that before, of the first beast who was fatally wounded and then came back to life. He was then permitted to give life to this statue so that it could speak. Someday, if I ever speak in the book of Revelation, we'll talk about that. Does Satan have the ability to produce life? This is one of the cases in the Hall theology where it seems like he does, and there's debate on that. Then the statue of the beast commanded that anyone refusing to worship it must die. He required everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be given a mark on the right hand or on the forehead. And no one could buy or sell anything without that mark, which was either the name of the beast or the number of representing his name. Wisdom is needed here. Let the one with understanding solve the meaning of the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. So, the point is, wow, sounds like something we're going to have in the future, what Nebuchadnezzar is doing right here with this very odd-looking, skinny statue. But again, not only have archaeologists found furnaces of this nature, they're usually furnaces that have holes at the top, which we're going to see in a second. They drop the people into the furnace. But they also have discoveries of statues of this nature that are very skinny. The proportions really out of whack. 90 and 9, that's just kind of not a right proportion. So we have archaeological things in Babylon, in fact. In fact, we're going to say this, there is a massive platform in Dura, the plain of Dura, in Babylon, a base. All they have is just a base. And some people wonder, was that the statue that Nebuchadnezzar used? We don't know. But it's a base that's been found and is possible from 2,600 years ago. Interesting, isn't it? The things we find from secular archaeologists. So there you go. We have the command to worship this statue. Let's look further now at verses 8 to 12 as we see remember the Babylonian advisors and wise men that Gabe and I have been talking about? They're demonic, these wise men. I shouldn't really call them wise men, we should call them fools. But they're magicians, they're advisors, they use demonic sources to help them determine the future. And they're going to rat out Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Did you hear me? They're going to rat them out because they're jealous about them. Remember chapter 2 when Gabe talked about them? Daniel interpreted the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, and not only said what the dream meant, but he told him what the dream was. And the wise men of Babylon couldn't do that. And Daniel did it, and then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were raised up in power, and so there's just a lot of jealousy over these guys, and they're ratting them out, getting them in trouble in verses 8 to 12. Verse 8. But some of the astrologers went to the king and informed on the Jews, ratted them out. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "Long live the king! You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and worship the gold statue when they hear the sound of the horn, the flute, whatever the zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments are." Sorry, I'm caught up in what a zither is. That decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon, and they pay no attention to you. Now, these guys could care less about the king on some level. They're really covering their own desires and longings. Your Majesty, they refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue you have set up. So there you go. They're ratted out. It's clear. They're in trouble. Now Nebuchadnezzar knows this. And these three boys, or young men, are probably thinking of what? Exodus chapter 2:20. You don't need to turn there, but let me read it, even though we know it well in the Ten Commandments. Forgive me for reading something so well known, but I think it's important. These three are committed to the first commandments of the Ten Commandments in Exodus 20. I am the Lord your God who rescued you from the land of Egypt, the place of your slavery. You must not have any other God but me. You must not make for yourself any idol of any kind or an image of anything in the heavens, on the earth, or in the sea. You must not bow down to them. Bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. It's pure jealousy, who will not tolerate your affection for other gods. And so, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego know that well. And these young men are so doggone brave. I stop and kind of the wind is taken out of me when I think about them. I go, wow. They've already been disoriented and disrupted by having their parents killed, maybe some siblings killed, ripped off into a foreign land, re-educated, they're scared to death, they're topsy-turvy, and yet they are committed to God and they are willing to die and not bow down to the statue. And it's because of the commandments in the Old Testament that these boys are following. As I said 2 weeks ago, I always compare Daniel and these guys to Mary. the mother of Jesus. I love Mary and her commitment to God at such an early age. I just can't get over Mary. She's one of the first 5 I'm going to see in heaven. I want to find. And I want to get to know her and hear, wow, how are you so godly at such an early age and so committed to God to be able to handle having God as your baby and all. And then my question is, how did these guys get so strong and brave at 18 or 19 to be willing to die? What? Nobody would have known. They're by themselves in this empire. They could have easily gotten away with it and bowed down. Nobody would have complained. No, not these guys. They are so strong in character. Maybe I should ask, I don't want to ask this question yet, but what do you think are the things that help develop their maturity at such an early age to be that strong? I don't see people that strong until they're in their 50s or 60s sometimes. But these guys were really bold and committed to God. And as we're going to see now, verses 13 to 15, we're going to see Nebuchadnezzar's jealous, irrational rage. I mean, this guy just goes bonkers over their refusal to worship the idols. Look at it, verse 13 to 15. Then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage, the Bible says, and ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. So that'd be scary. So here you are standing before the most powerful man in the world who can lop your head off in any moment. When they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I've set up?" Verse 15. "I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I've made when you hear the sound of the music and instruments. Clear out the wax in your ears. But if you refuse," that's not in there, by the way. "But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace." And then, he throws down the dare. What's that called? Double dog dare? Is that what you say? What's it called? Double dog dare? "And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power." There's sheer power and arrogance. Who can stop me? And so, interestingly, look back at chapter 2, verse 47. Some of you have been thinking this, you're ahead of me. What happened to Nebuchadnezzar? Remember in chapter 2, he was so impressed with Daniel's ability to interpret the dream that he said, "God is God." Look at verse 47 in chapter 2. "The king said to Daniel, 'Truly your God is the greatest of gods, the Lord over kings himself, a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal the secret.'" He's already forgotten it, hasn't he? He's already forgotten. Pride has consumed this man. It's hard to dig pride out of somebody. It's been one of the past 5 years I've been praying that God would deal with my pride. I didn't see myself as what I call the classic arrogant person. A classic arrogant person is somebody who brags all the time. Now, I do some of that. But I mean, brags, I'm fast, I'm smart, I'm stronger than you, I'm better looking than you. I've done that every once in a while, but that's not my real thing. I have pride in my stubbornness. It's more subtle and quiet, and I hide my sin, or I don't listen to feedback, and there's pride in that way. And it's hard to root pride out of you. You notice that in your life? I have. It's hard. And so let's be generous to Nebuchadnezzar. The guy is so full of pride. It's going to take time to have this pride rooted out of him. Next Sunday, Gabe's going to show how God brings the hammer down on him and finally root out the pride out of the guy. I mean, the hammer comes down. Talk about a hammer on a bee's nest. Woo! He gets hammered next chapter. But he's forgotten his quick little turning to the God of the Jews. And he's forgotten that. Now he's put himself up as God and saying, "What God can stop me? Who's able to rescue from my power?" I want you to catch the arrogance here of this man in this. And pride blinds us. Well, let's look at the threes. I'm going to call them the threes. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So I have to say every time. The threes' response to Nebuchadnezzar is quite bold. It almost seems cocky. I don't think it is, but it feels almost cocky. Maybe it is. But look at verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you." Wow. I mean, this is real words. This is life's on the line, man. Where did these three guys get the strength to be that full of faith? Because they're facing death. They love God more than they love life. It's just amazing. Verse 17. "If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty." So they're polite to him. Verse 18. "But," and I like this. This I would have been mad if they hadn't said this. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, Your Majesty, that we will never serve your gods and worship the gold statue you have set up. Now, some of our popular preachers today will preach that if you follow God, He will protect you from everything. It's a promise. He'll make you successful and wealthy and protect you from everything. That's not the teaching here. No, He's able to protect us from anything and everything. But if He doesn't, we're still willing to die a wretched, horrible death in a furnace because we believe Yahweh more than your God. Wow, didn't that shock you? What? I would like to have these three guys here in an interview right now. What? Yeah. How do these guys get so great? I'm not even close to that. And I'm 61. How do you get there? Willing to die for their belief. Quite impressive. Reminds me of Acts chapter 20. Again, you don't need to turn there, I'm flying there. Acts 20, verse 24. You probably know what I'm referring to. Remember Apostle Paul said this? This is what Paul said in Acts 20:24. But my life is worth nothing to me unless I use it for finishing the work assigned me by the Lord Jesus, the work of telling others the good news about the wonderful grace of God. Now, how do these guys and gals get to the point where they're willing to die horrible deaths? And Paul ended up being beheaded, and he was stoned, and it's like, wow, their faith is off the charts. I'm not even close to them, but what's wrong with us? You know, what's happened to us that we're not this brave? And I don't mean to make us feel guilty. I guess if you're in these circumstances, it forces out maturity sometimes, and maybe that's what's going on. But they're willing to die, and they're very committed to that, and so it's impressive. I just can only say, wow. Wow, they love God more than they love life. Let's look at verses 19 to 23 now, and what happens when they're thrown into the furnace. Starting verse 19. Nebuchadnezzar was so furious. I mean, this just nailed his pride. He's just going bazonkers. That's a word. With Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that his face became distorted with rage. He commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. A figure of speech, probably. Then he ordered some of the strongest men, not sure why this is so, strongest men of his army, he didn't want them to escape, strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So they tied them up and threw them into the furnace, fully dressed in their pants, turbans, robes, and other garments. And because the king, in his anger, in his rage, had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. Now, I don't know about you, don't miss little things like that. Now, it's not little in my mind. It's not little to those families, the wives and the kids of those soldiers. Those men were killed because of the commitment that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had to God. Their collateral damage to their commitment to God. Wow. 3 fathers, maybe 6, depending on if they had 2 soldiers per person. So maybe 3 to 6 soldiers were killed because of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's faith. You stop and think. Don't miss these little things. What does it remind me of? Anybody guess? I'll give you $100 if you can remind me what it reminds me of. Okay. Bethlehem. What's the story there? Somebody said Shelley or somebody said. What happens there? The collateral damage. Yeah, because of Jesus' birth. Maybe up to 20 baby boys were killed in Bethlehem because of Jesus coming to the earth. Not their fault. 20 parents lost their boys, and if Jesus hadn't come, Herod wouldn't have killed those 20, or estimates are, I'll just estimate the size of Bethlehem and say maybe 20 boys of that age lived in Bethlehem. There's different estimates. Whatever, 10, 20, doesn't matter. Wow, I've wept over that story often. I think of those parents because of God coming down incarnate. Those boys, those families lost their kids. Wow, God, your plan is often difficult. It's difficult. The collateral damage that happens. But God's good, and He knows what He's doing, and so these soldiers die as a result. Verse 23. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. So if this is your first time reading it, you're going, wow, what happened to them? You know, if you didn't grow up reading this 10 zillion times like I did as a kid, you're going, what happened? Well, let's look. In verses 24 to 27, we see how God miraculously delivered the 3. Verse 24. But suddenly, Nebuchadnezzar jumped up. Apparently he's sitting somewhere in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, "Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" "Yes, your majesty, we certainly did," they replied. "Well then, look," Nebuchadnezzar shouted, "I see 4. There's my book, children's book. "I see 4 men, unbound," what? "Walking around in the fire unharmed. And listen to this, guys. The 4th one looks like a god. He looks divine, like deity." Now, what it was that indicated that, we don't know, besides the fact that there were 3 thrown in and that was the 4th one, so that makes you wonder, okay, this guy's divine. Maybe there was something about him, we don't know. Somehow Nebuchadnezzar thinks this guy's divine. He is deity in some form. And so theologians have for thousands of years surmised, is this an angel? Could have been. But most people think it was a pre-incarnate Jesus Christ. The second person of the triunity periodically showed up in the Old Testament, took on a temporary body, not the body of Jesus yet, that comes later, but takes on a body and shows up here. Now, whether it's Jesus or an angel that God sent doesn't really matter on some level. I think it was Jesus, though. I like that more. I have no reason why that's so. I just think it's more captivating story. But wow, think of that. So out of the 4th one, that would catch your attention, wouldn't it? My goodness, it's horrendous. I mean, furnace, I've gone to, where's that place at Ford Museum we go to where they do the glass burning?
Greenfield Village.
Greenfield Village. I love the sound of the roar of those furnaces. You know, just triple, quadruple, massive furnace. And then now there's not only 3 guys still alive, there's a 4th one alive, and whoa, this would get your attention, for sure. And so he sees 4. It goes on, then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could, verse 26, to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. Hello, what? Then the high officers, officials, governors, and advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their heads was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell of smoke. Wow. Wow, wow. There you go. There's a pretty big miracle. I thought of Deuteronomy 4:20 at this point. Listen to Deuteronomy 4:20. They probably thought of this too. "Remember that the Lord rescued you from the iron smelting furnace of Egypt in order to make you his very own people and his special possession, which is what you are today." I'm sure Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego knew the Old Testament well, thought of that. Wow, God delivered us from Egypt, and out of that symbolic furnace, he can deliver us from this furnace. And so he did. And these guys lived, and it sure got Nebuchadnezzar's attention, didn't it? Look at verse 28 through 30. As we see now, once again, good old Neb in his I call him Neb, it's hard to say his whole name. Neb in his pride gets rocked, and we have, I would say, a superficial repentance again. A superficial turning to God. Because remember, one of the 4 characteristics said of this age, not only is it a brutal, raw time, but it's very polytheistic. Nobody was atheist in this era, but everybody believed in many gods. So he's just going to throw Jesus or God into all of his gods. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, verse 28, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." So he's changed now. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They defied the king. That's me. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make this decree. So now he swings the other decree. And again, here's the rawness of it all. If any people, whatever their race or nation or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn from limb to limb, and their houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. Oh, great. That's a wonderful response. There is no other God who can rescue like this. So Nebuchadnezzar has some kind of returning. Verse 30, then the king promised Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to even higher positions in the province of Babylon. Whew. Wow, what a fun story. I loved it as a kid. I read it 10 million times. I'm literally, I could tell you every detail, especially for my storybook. But it's not just a fairy tale, is it? It's not just a child's story. It's somehow God wants us to get a message from this. And so I want to open it up to you here. What do you think God's telling us? We're not going to have to bow down to a statue. Proud. So what is God telling us? What do you gather God is what's the message from this passage for us 2,600 years later? What do you think?
I really like that. It reminds me of the story of Jonathan, Saul's running up to the Philistines.
With such brain.
He defeated basically the whole Philistine army him in his sermon,
Yeah.
he says, nothing can stop God from saving by many or by few.
What are these guys, smoking? How have they gotten so great? Yeah, it's just amazing. Jonathan, Daniel, Mary, Shadrach, Meshach. Wow, they have a level of commitment to this invisible God that they see with their eyes. Yeah. What else? What feelings you have, thoughts you have. What is God trying to say to you, you think? Yes? Nice and loud.
I just thought it was interesting because we were talking on the way in this morning just about how more and more it seems like only certain points of view are acceptable, and I hadn't actually said it to John, but I was just thinking to myself that I wonder if we are coming to the point where it's, we'll have to say, well, yeah, we're Christians, and someone is going to say, well, we're not going to have that.
Right.
And
Possible.
just the timing of it is interesting because
Right.
what I keep coming to is, will I be able to stand?
Right.
I want to. I pray I can, but
Right. I've said in my emails, if you've read them, it's possible the church will be blamed for super spreading of the virus. We've already been blamed for it. Some churches have been a little irresponsible, and so we'll get blamed for it of spreading the virus because the church is one of the few institutions that's continuing a meeting like this. And so could we have persecution? There was a pastor who said that a few months ago. He saw it coming. It could. Who knows? Yeah. How will we handle that? Yes?
I think it's a great visual representation of God's promise to us that He will always be with us.
God's promise that He will always be with us through furnace or whatever, yeah.
It may not get rescued,
But He's
going
there.
to be with us
Right.
while we go through.
Yeah. One other thought, and then we're gonna pray and have some open sharing for 10 minutes. Yes, in the back.
So over the quarantine, I've been reading different stories of people to help just give perspective. And last one I read was Corey Tenenbaum's book.
Corey Tenenbaum's book? The Hiding Place?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I just can't get over the same thing with her, like the
Yeah.
courage she had to say the things that she said, to do the things that she did, and
Right.
I feel like it's a really good example because it has so much emotion and feeling in her story.
Uh-huh.
That like you kind of wonder what they have going on in their heads when they say what they say here.
Yeah,
But Corey has like written out so much of what she's feeling or how she's struggled through it or
very
what kind
similar.
of messages came to mind. And
Yeah, Corey Tenenbaum's story of the hiding place is very similar in many ways to the story of her courage of defending the Jews and protecting them. And yeah, where do those people get that faith? And maybe we would. Maybe if we were put on the spot, I hope I do. If I'm ever put on the spot in my life, I hope I'm willing to die for God. I won't go until if that time comes. Yeah. And again, we can think big term, just little term. What do we do with small tests? Are we standing up for God even in small ways, subtle ways that we're pressured as a culture? And I think this story helps us think about that too. Well, let me close the prayer at this point, and then I'm going to open up the mic for 10 minutes for anybody to share again, either what this story hits you, or about anything that God has been teaching you these past months through the pandemic, or through what's been going on, the issue of race issues, or whatever you want to share. I'm going to give you 10 minutes to come up front and share that with us. So let me pray. Father, thank you for these three men. They are strong men. Braver than many of us, and thank you for their testimony. They were real guys who really lived, really felt things, and were fearful and brave, and just thank you for these stories. They're not fairy tales, they're true, and help them to be an encouragement to us, motivate us to live with passion and commitment to you. That old-fashioned commitment is being lost in this world to you, where we love God more than we love life. We confess that and want to grow in that area and know that you're patient with us, developing us into brave men and women who will stand up for you in a good way. In your name we pray. And thank you for this story. In your name. Amen. All right. As we've been doing these past Sundays, I want to give a chance again for a few of you to come up. We're going to be doing this for a while, just to share any miscellaneous thoughts about what God's teaching you these past months through the pandemic. Feel free to come up here, chat briefly, if you would. Chris.
Well, my thoughts aren't fully formed on this, but one of the things I thought about, one of the pressures I think
is out there right now, social media-wise, is the Black Lives Matter. And I read a post, I think just yesterday, that said, from a Christian, it said something like, if you can't say Black Lives Matter, like, there's a problem with you as a Christian. I was really troubled by that. And so I just think it's important for you to know, like, we are wrestling with how to talk about race issues from a Christian point of view and not just go with the flow of how our secular culture is responding to these issues. We're going to look different than our secular culture, and I just kind of wanted to reassure you about that. I don't think that was a fair statement to say. So that was.
That's good. Yeah. Short, sweet, whatever you want to share. God's teaching you something you're struggling with, something you want to pray about even. You can do that too. Okay. Ben.
This is kind of relating to the story and just what I feel like God has been doing through the pandemic for me is just like seeing where am I building my foundation. And I think that like if we were like in that situation of trying to die or in the situation of dying for our faith, that where you're building your foundation is a huge part of that. So
Yeah. Good reminder of that. I love having young men share. Thank you, Ben. Chris?
Since you said the young man share.
Yeah. What are you, 28? 29.
I always wanted to come up and have to adjust a microphone. I think the challenge has really been for all of us over the last 3 months is what's happened not only in our country but across the world. And I never, ever, ever, ever feared that freedoms would be taken away from us in this country. And as Dave mentioned before, just the attack religion has had, or people have had on religion in this country over the last few months. And even as David mentioned too, just the challenges in certain states of us being able to do this, to assemble. And it scared me. It scared me quite a bit that, the elements of what we have gone through, and just not had our choice. And, we've chosen to all assemble here today, which is great to see everybody. And yet people choose not to assemble too, and that's fine too. But I never thought I would see this in my lifetime of what's happening. And so, I hope some way, somehow, us as a country, we learn from this. And frankly, there's the appreciation we should have for having these freedoms. Gabe talked about earlier, there's countries that, frankly, the people are under martial law. We kind of were under a semi-martial law for a few weeks, but this has been something that's really kind of had a reawakening in me, just how special of a country that we do have. And I just hope that, for myself, I'm not really 29, just to let you guys know. But my kids are now getting older, and I see a time where maybe I have some grandchildren, and I was always very excited about that. And what's happening over the last 3 months, it's kind of made me second guess would I want to be born into what the future could hold. So anyway, I just want you to encourage you all to kind of just think about these things and pray about them, meditate on them, and think about them. So.
Thanks, Chris. One other person, then we're going to have a final song. One other person, something God's been stirring you, and you'd be mad at yourself if you didn't share today. You drive home. All right, Heather.
So mine's a little bit more personal. My husband and I, hope you pray for him, he's married to me. I've had some really difficult things happening in our home. And I think the COVID thing, it's kind of been like feeling like I'm under pressure in a different way than I was used to. At first I was really excited, I don't have a whole lot to do. And I wasn't as busy, so I was enjoying that freedom. And then all of a sudden, stuff started happening in our home where, so we have all 3 kids living under our roof, adults, and turns out I really have this thing where I want to be acknowledged, I want to be appreciated, I want to be accepted. Tony, don't make that face. I'm a stepmom and a mom, and so those, that makes it complicated to some degree. And I guess what I'm saying is I have been banging on Rick to make these kids behave. You're the leader of our home. What kind of example are you giving? Oh, gosh. This poor guy. And, some of that is true. Some of that is good stuff that I want, right? But it turns out that those things are idols. And I had never thought of that as an idol. I guess what I'm saying to you is I didn't realize that my idol is to be comfortable in my own home. My idol is to have the dignity of having a human being. None of that is wrong, but I was demanding it, and demanding it from my husband, demanding it from my kids. And I'm just realizing what a hypocrite I am. Is God really my God? Do I have no other idols above him? It kind of goes with this whole, I think I have them embedded in me because of my culture, because of my upbringing, because of my personhood. I don't know. I just wanted to share that with you because it reminded me of Rachel, who couldn't have kids, and then she gets blessed with Joseph. And then when they got, they're pulling away, forget exactly how they get pulled away, and they come and they're like, someone took an idol, someone is hiding an idol, and she's hiding it under her saddle. And meanwhile, she has all the blessings of God. I feel like that's me. Like, yeah, you're my God, but I gotta keep this thing tucked over here, my comfort, what I want. So I just wanted to ask you, maybe God's telling you something similar, not that thing, but just it's subtle. I didn't even know I had that pride in there. And I hope you celebrate with me, and I hope you text me about what you're learning. Yeah.
Before Anna Cheryl sing, Steve, would you just pray out loud for the Rommel family and deal with their 3 boys and the challenges of that, would you please?
Father, thank you for Rick and Heather and their desire to reflect your love in a real clear way to their living family. Father, we ask that you would, in a very unique way, give them wisdom, grace, strength. But more than anything, let them experience your closeness, that you really are enough for them, and that they can respond not out of need, but out of an overflow of you being close to them, Father. And they know that you are. They know that you're with them. We ask that you would let them taste that more and more. We pray for your Son. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Steve.
So I'm going to ask you to stand this morning, and we're not going to stand and call out to worship an idol, but we are going to stand, and when the music starts, we are going to sing to the one true and living God.
Wonder how he old hymn for us all to think about. Oh, the deep, deep love of Jesus, vast, unmeasured, boundless, free, rolling as a mighty ocean in its fullness over me. Underneath me, all around me, is the current of thy love, leading onward, leading homeward to thy glorious rest above. Oh, the deep, deep love of Jesus, spread his praise from shore to shore. How he loveth, ever loveth, changeth nevermore, nevermore. How he watches o'er his loved ones, died to call them all his own. How for them he intercedeth, watcheth o'er them from the throne. Oh, the deep, deep love of Jesus. Love of every love the best. 'Tis an ocean vast of blessing. 'Tis a haven sweet of rest. Oh, the deep, deep love of Jesus. 'Tis a heaven of heaven to me. And it lifts me up to glory, for it lifts me up to thee.
May this day be another day where you see what it is that he's doing to conform you to the image of his Son. Have a great day.
Mother.